Let's talk about planting a naysayer in academic essays. So for most essays, it's a great idea to plant a naysayer. In other words, make a concession while standing your ground. It might not seem like it in our politics, but generally when you can grant the merits of the other point of view, that can actually make your argument much stronger. So there are a couple of ways you can do this. The first thing you want to do is anticipate potential objections. So you can do this by reading your paper out loud to a family member or just by making a list, a physical list or a mental note of what your opposition or what people who disagree with you are going to say. So you might say something like, of course, many will probably disagree on the grounds that such and such. If you include on what grounds your opposition might disagree right up front, then people who are reading your paper, but they're skeptical of your argument, they might be more inclined to listen. Or something like, yet readers may challenge my view that by insisting that such and such. So you want to anticipate what some potential objections might be. Now this could be in the beginning of your essay, this could be as your first body paragraph. You could also do this toward the end of your essay. You could even do this as a hook to an essay, but it's a great idea to think of what your opposition might say before they have a chance to say it. Make sure you represent your opposing points of view or the opposing points of view fairly. There's nothing worse than watering down the other point of view or misrepresenting the other point of view. We want to avoid straw man or card stacking fallacies. So like I said before, to represent another point of view fairly, to give your argument and to give yourself more credibility as a writer, you might want to spend an entire paragraph addressing what the other point of view is in its full complexity. Answer objections head on. So depending on the type of essay, whether it's a more informal conversational essay or a research paper, that will determine how you want to plant these naysayers. But if it's a more informal research paper, you might just ask a rhetorical question. But is my proposal for creating outdoor classrooms unrealistic? So you can ask a rhetorical question. Obviously, you don't want to ask and then answer too many questions. That gets kind of annoying. It loses its power if there are questions all throughout your essay, but a couple of well-placed questions can be a great idea. You can also let us hear your opposition directly, so you can actually have a naysayer speaking in your essay. A hypothetical naysayer, or you could actually bring in the exact words of a critic or a writer or a politician. So not feasible, some will say. Outdoor classrooms will cost the college thousands of dollars and will not boost enrollment. So here we can actually hear and see exactly what a naysayer might argue. Change election day to a Saturday, skeptics will ask, and they would be right that in our overheated political climate, it might not be possible yet. Now, obviously, in a very formal research paper, this type of tone, this type of sentence structure, right, just having yet as a complete sentence might not make sense, but for a more informal paper, this could be really powerful. When you're planting a naysayer, try to name that specific person or group or organization who might disagree with you. When you can be more specific, that's ideal. So instead of just saying my opponents or people who disagree with me, you might say congressional Republicans or Democrats or supporters of a particular proposition or fans of this show or critics of X, Y, or Z. And when you're writing a research paper, oftentimes you will be disagreeing with or granting or making a concession to a point that another person has made. And oftentimes this person will be a scientist or a researcher or a scholar. So it's good if you can state their first name and their last name and why they're some sort of authority figure. So you could say something like Jill Gonzalez, an epidemiologist at the UCLA Medical Center, argues X or believes this, but, and then include why you disagree with her points or why you agree with some of her points, but not all of them. You might wonder how you can do this without either name calling or speaking about people in generalities or stereotyping, which of course you don't want to do. One of the ways that you can do that when you're naming your naysayer is to grant or to recognize that not all people think alike in the same group, right? So if you're going to say congressional Republicans believe X, it's important to concede that not all congressional Republicans think the same way. So you might say something like, essential workers are so diverse in their views that it's hard to generalize about them, but some are likely to object on these grounds. So that way you're naming your naysayer, but if your naysayer is a group of people, in this case essential workers, it's important to grant that they're not all going to think exactly the same way. It just makes you seem more reasonable as a writer. It's important that when you're planting a naysayer, you still maintain your own argument, right? You're planting a naysayer in order to strengthen your own argument, to show the reader that you consider the other points of view, but ultimately you still have to have a stance, right? You still have to have your own argument. So how can you do this while standing your ground? You can use any of these templates and still maintain your argument. So, although I grant that the term essential worker boosts the status of these important employees, I still maintain that, followed by the rest of the sentence. So, although, and then you grant the merits of the other point of view, you agree with one part of it, you're still going to insist on whatever your point of view is. Here's an example from Is Google Making Us Stupid, which you read a couple weeks ago. In this example, Nicholas Carr actually spends a couple paragraphs planting a naysayer. And he says, even though he's skeptical and nervous about what internet technologies like Google are doing to his thinking and to our thinking, he talks about how famous philosophers and people who study technology throughout time have been fearful of technology. He talks about with the invention of the printing press, people believing that that was going to be the end of people's memories or ability to retain information, and that didn't happen. So he talks about how all of these people have been alarmed by technology throughout history, but it hasn't worked out to be this disaster. So he's giving examples that you would think are disproving his point, that we should be nervous and fearful of what Google is doing to our brains. But I think that only makes him seem more credible. So he says, so yes, you should be skeptical of my skepticism, his skepticism about technology. Perhaps those who dismiss critics of the internet as Luddites, those are people who are afraid of technology, who in England actually broke the machinery that they felt was taking away their jobs, or nostalgists will be proved correct. And from our hyperactive, data-soaked minds will spring a golden age of intellectual discovery and universal wisdom. Then again, the net isn't the alphabet, and although it may replace the printing press, it produces something altogether different. So he is planting or making some concessions, but he is still insisting that the internet is different, that it's doing something to our brains that's damaging. And of course, there's a little bit of sarcasm, a little bit of humor in there, but I think it's still highly effective, and he does this toward the end of his essay. So I hope that helps. Understanding how to plant a naysayer is really important, whether it's an informal essay or a research paper.